Welcome to the Many Adventures of Peter and Fee, Volume 1, Homecoming, by Kelvin Fernandez. Peter and Fee has budding communities across Reddit, Discord, Goodreads, Twitter, Facebook, and more, so I encourage you to seek out your comfort zone, join the conversation, and let me know what you thought of each chapter as you get through them. Since the series has just begun, the communities are small, so there's a good chance I will personally respond and we can have a discussion. I hope you enjoy listening to the adventures just as much as I enjoyed creating them. So without further ado, let's start the journey. The Many Adventures of Peter and Fee, Volume 1, Homecoming, Chapter 9, Fear and Fierce. Peter's labored grunt echoed back at him as he tripped over a maliciously curled root. The bowed oak tree blustered with glee at his pain. "You did that on purpose," Peter cursed. Burnt amber rays left behind by the hidden sun were no longer able to guide his way. The heavy moss curtains dangling from the tree's branches weren't helpful either. Ranging from darkest of greens to palest of whites, they were a constant deterrent to his already beleaguered pace. Fee, of course, was zipping ahead. Ducking under branches, scrambling over roots, she deftly navigated her way through the darkness. She bounded off a tree, splintering the wood, and ripped a hole right through its mossy veil, disappearing behind it. Peter had never seen the little girl so full of life. He quite enjoyed this side of her, despite her cocky tone. "You said you would keep up!" Her head poked through the hole, only to taunt him. "Just give me a second to catch my breath," he panted, leaning against the tree. "Hurry up! We're nearly there!" Fee disappeared again. Running low, she navigated her way through a short bog, finding the patches with solid footing. The loamy soil was soft and springy. She pressed her toes into the ground, then sprung up to the first rock in a mossy outcrop. Hopping from stone to stone, sure of her footing against the angled rock face, she reached the summit. Fee took in a lungful of air. The sweet resin of the trees mixed in with the sharpness of the moist foliage emanating from the forest floor. She couldn't get enough. Tearing through the veil, Peter followed. Wariness clung to the back of his mind. He couldn't let Fee's carefree demeanor distract him from the dangers lurking just beyond his sight. Branches cracked behind his back, roots slithered across the ground. Giant willows swept the floor around them, keeping their bases clear and inviting. Peter would have sworn the forest was alive. Well, more so than usual, he thought. Opting to walk around the boulders, he was greeted by a bouquet of beauty. Where the trees gave way, wild flowers took their hold. Climbing hollyhocks reached to his shoulders, their petals streaked with animated purples and pinks. Anemones sprouted in bunches at his knees, their colors bleached in spots where the sun was allowed to reach. Below, chitin mushrooms infested the ground, releasing their fungal spores in an orange mist. Peter examined the shelled fungi, their hard exoskeleton presumably protecting them from the onslaught of woodland creatures. Not that there seems to be any, he thought. Despite all the shifting and shuffling going on around him, he couldn't spot so much as a flying chipmunk. A wilted flower drew his attention. It stood alone, as if shunned by its fellow plants. Petals littered the earth, dry and crinkled. Its sepals twined in a wreath, the sapphire stamens resting sadly upon them. Peter felt a tinge of pity for the flower. Fully bloomed, it would have been the prettiest of them all. It struck him that this might be a rare find. It was the only one of its kind in the area, and it clearly had little time left in this world. He was suddenly overcome with an urge to smell it. Perhaps he'd have a memory for Ellie upon their return. He crouched down and was delighted to find the flower pulling its neck up to accommodate his wishes. Its remaining petals spread out, the vivacious blue pattern beckoning him towards the deep pit within its core. He hovered lower, closing his eyes to truly experience the sweet nectar wafting towards him. He inhaled, and was transported to a meadow of solace. Sweet bliss embraced him in a blanket of warmth. I could stay like this forever, he thought. Fee came flying down from above and trampled the charming flower underfoot. "Are you insane?" she yelled. What the hell, Fee? Peter yelled back, annoyed she had disturbed his tranquility. I take my eyes off you, and you go sticking your head in a necroblossom. Are you a child? Do I need to hold your hand? What are you on about? I was right behind you. I just stopped for a second to smell the roses. A second? Fee scorned. I've been searching for you for 15 minutes. I must have been halfway across the woods before I realized you weren't lagging behind. I just saw you a moment ago. Peter didn't understand. This is a necroblossom, she said, picking up a foot to show him the smeared remains of the blue flower. It was captivating you. It was going to eat you. You were going to die. That can't be true, Peter thought. You're kidding me. I've never heard of a necroblossom in my life. Oh, my mistake then, Fee shrugged, walking away. I must have confused it with the completely harmless blossom that grows in the backtrack woods that no man dares enter. Silly me. Peter made to follow, but could not. His knees would not lift from the forest floor. His eyes widened in horror as tiny fibers clung to his pants. Thousands upon thousands of little hooked roots dug into his legs and boots, holding him to the ground. The roots came from all around, several feet from where the necroblossom stood. With a shiver of dread, he yanked himself from the ground, rolling over in a frenzied fit. He stood abruptly and wiped off the roots still clinging to his pants. They fell to the ground to join their brothers, stretching skyward towards their escaped prey. Peter only just noticed the soreness in his knees. His companion gave him a pitiable look. I'll take my thank you now, Fee waited. They continued on through the woods, this time Peter sticking much closer to his guide. He wasn't used to following Fee, and the little girl did nothing to accommodate him. She nimbly strode through thick brush and open expanse alike, leaving Peter wheezing, but not daring to get left behind again. The bountiful lakes of the Faranese forests were unable to penetrate the deep woods here. The ancient grove remained sequestered at the world's edge, a dark spot untouched at the edge of the map. This far in, gigantic sequoias dominated the landscape. Their massive trunks, Peter counted, taking a full 8 seconds to pass by. Their branches, over 100 feet in the air, reached out to greet one another, forming a botanic canopy blocking the heavens. The little light that managed to sneak through was quickly guzzled by the plant life in a desperate struggle for finite nutrients. Those that came out on top were like nothing familiar to the civilized world. It was these insidious flora that welcomed the first explorers hundreds of years ago. Armed with torches to light their way, they struck out, unafraid of the encircling darkness. Not one returned. The second party was wise enough to leave a man behind to send reinforcements after them should they linger too long. Not one returned. The third party, headed by Geoffrey Curran, had the foolish idea to tie each man to a shared length of rope and slowly feed a skewer of human meat through the forest's heart. They were dragged mercilessly, crying and screaming for release as they were consumed by the forest in turn. That was enough curiosity. Curran named it plainly, the Backtrack Woods, and left it to fester, secluded from the rest of the world. Clear in its message, both brave and foolish alike ignored the warning, but their composition mattered not. The woods returned no man who dared penetrate its veil. Peter fancied himself inquisitive, although it was often confused for bravery, and even more so for foolishness. With one eye fixed on Fee's back, he warily kept track of his surroundings. A fallen willow was besieged by bugs. Ants, beetles, termites, steadily stripping it apart. Hanging vines twisted and twirled before his very eyes, writhing like snakes in fits of copulation. All the while, one by one, hidden flowers sprung up to greet them. From beneath the earth, they sporadically appeared and opened wide to display their striking patterns and vibrant colors. Peter offered them less than a passing glance. The darkness descended faster than he had hoped. Soon, it became hard to make out his own hands in front of him. Without light, every bump, every snap, caused Peter to flick around in panic. The forest is teasing you, Fee warned. It does want to kill me. How am I supposed to defend myself if I can't see a foot in front of my face? You need to relax. Her voice was straight and calm. The trees can sense your fear. If you're attacked, it will be your own fault. Just calm down and focus on the flowers, without actually touching them this time. The world was pitch black, but the flowers cared not. The crimsons, violets, and golds of their petals retained their dazzling beauty, radiating their own light in fierce defiance against the night. Peter watched as the ground came alive, new flowers sprouting up by the minute, adding their own hue to the glowing rainbow sea. Flora, Flora, Fee answered his unasked query. Bioluminescence, Peter whispered, afraid to disturb the spectacle. He had read how deep-sea fish could produce their own light to attract their prey, and there wasn't a mage at Laurentide that was a stranger to the beauty of the firefly's mating dance. But this was something else. The forest brightened on a grand scale, a unified effort across various species to simultaneously adapt to their harsh environment. The glow spread, outlining the trees, the rocks, and the two companions. He could count his fingers once again. Flora, Flora, Peter thought. Technically a misnomer. The light produced is chemical-based, rather than acquired from photons, as the floro would imply. Still, it was rare for him to be learning new words from his younger companion. This made 2 on the day. Fee was uninterested in the luminescent flowers. Her sights were aimed skyward, raking the leaf shield above, searching for pinpoints of light. With the sun long set, she could only rely on the glimmer of stars. What are you looking for? Peter asked, reluctantly pulling his eyes away from the ground to stare up into the darkness. The tree keepers, she responded. I've done my best to keep us on a safe path, but if we don't come across them soon, the forest will devour us, no matter how brave a face you try to put on. Okay, what am I supposed to see? Wings? Glowing eyes? Rustling leaves? Holes. Holes? The tree keepers are the protectors of the forest. They make holes in the leaf cover so that light can shine down on the creatures below. And what exactly are the tree keepers? Fee turned around, giving him a sly wink. You'll know when you see them. Why spoil the surprise? So on they went, Fee in front, Peter 2 steps behind. Their pace had slowed considerably since they were both craning their necks, not properly looking where they were going. 3 times Fee changed their course, seemingly at random, but Peter trusted his leader. What if it's cloudy? He wondered, when he walked straight into Fee. There! The little girl grinned proudly, pointing towards the sky. It was a peculiar sight. They faced a blank wall of black, except for a small circle where a few stars blinked through. Peter hurried to follow his frantic friend as they moved directly under the hole. Peering straight up, the jagged shapes of severed leaves could be seen far above, outlining the portrait of the heavens. Fee was already off. She had found a second hole to their right and was clambering over a fallen log towards it. Peter vaulted himself up onto the decaying beam. From his perch, he could see not 1, but 3 other holes, leading deeper into the forest. This way! This way! Fee gestured excitedly. Her ears stretched high, an easy beacon for Peter to chase after. But even rested after their ambling, he was no match for her speed. Fee flew through the forest, lifting her head every 10 paces to confirm her heading. She pushed through the dense foliage and clustered thickets until she could hear the rhythmic pounding she expected. Thoom! Thoom! 100 yards later, she could feel it. She stood in a small clearing, listening to the echo. The tremors vibrated through the trees. The mushrooms shuddered as the ground quaked. Thoom! Thoom! Peter caught up to find Fee waiting for him. The shaking ground had him on edge, but her broad grin disarmed him. Is that them? He asked. Look down, she hinted. He looked to the ground and noticed nothing spectacular. Hard dirt caked his boots. He brushed it off in the small clearing over the compressed grass. The blades were uniformly mashed, as if something had been lying there for an extended period of time. In fact, the small clearing itself seemed to sink a couple inches. A small circle, big enough for them both to stand in. Thoom! Thoom! It's a footprint, Peter realized. Fee giggled and beckoned him on. The path they trod was wide. Here, the sequoias stood farther apart, and the radiant flowers maintained a respectful distance from where they stepped. The footprints grew in number, and soon the ground was so craggy it became hard to walk. The distinct footsteps were no more, replaced by a muddled rumbling that refused to let the ground rest. They followed the gradual curve of their route, and abruptly, around the bend, the tree keepers came into view. Peter was not sure what he was seeing in the dim glow of the flora. At first, he thought they were gust elephants, what with their sagging gray hide, but a few blinks immediately corrected him. They were much too large. Each one could have carried a small herd of gust elephants on its back. Their curved tails swung lazily behind them, descending from their backsides. Their four legs, some thicker than even the mighty trunks of the sequoias, rose up to hold their bodies high enough to have to crane your neck to its limits. Each step created a cloud of dust from the sheer force of the impact. They walked in single file, one tree keeper following the next. Peter counted 3 from where he stood, but imagined the line continued well beyond his sight. They came up beside the last one. Its foot lifted sluggishly from the ground and traveled over their heads. The force of the step sent ripples through Peter's cloak. He swallowed as he hesitantly approached. He had no desire to get any closer, but Fee's nonchalant advance challenged him forward. The night hid the creature's true scale. Peter hoped to catch a glimpse of its head as he maneuvered around, but could only discern the overbearing mass of its body. Its wrinkled skin hung loosely, in places drooping in sack-like folds. Wiry white hairs poked out sparsely between the creases. The tree keepers were evidently very, very old. A sharp crunch announced the splintering of branches high overhead. Peter looked skyward to find a new hole being pierced through the forest canopy. For the first time, moonlight flooded into the woods, the white beam stabbing away at the darkness with its holy blade. Peter stopped in his tracks. The light revealed the tree keeper's head, casually munching away to expand the hole. Its square white teeth ground the branches into bits as its purple tongue stripped the leaves away. All this occurred over 100 feet in the air, high above even its own body. Its neck stood rigidly in place, the silhouette of the solitary stalk rising high to meet its head at the apex. The sagging skin unfurled there, stretching taut against the muscular vertebrae. Fee was climbing up a leg. Her fingers finding hold in the crinkled crevices, she easily monkeyed her way atop its body. "Where are you going now?" Peter wondered in alarm. "I want a better view." She peeked her head down. "Don't worry, you're safe with the keepers. The forest knows to keep its distance from its protectors. So what am I supposed to do?" "Follow the herd. I'll meet you at the front. Oh, and try not to get trampled." Fee pulled her head away and fell back into the creature's hide. The aged skin was rough, but it shifted like dough to accommodate her. She could have fallen asleep comfortably if she so desired, but that was not her intention. Somersaulting back, she righted herself and raised her head to her goal. The tree keeper had moved on from its snack, its head once again cloaked in darkness. But the base of its neck was right before her. And there's only one way to go, she thought. Methodically, she wrapped her arms around its neck, making it barely an eighth of the way. The taut flesh provided little in the way of handholds, but the tough hide had plenty to grip on its own. As she made her ascent, the full herd came into view. Unable to properly see, Fee could make them out by their steps, thanks to the flora's glow. "Only 9 of you left now, huh?" she thought, patting the creature's neck sympathetically. "What will happen to the forest when you're gone?" "You won't be able to come back," a voice in the back of her head whispered sadly. She reached the staggering height of the top and just clung there below its head for a bit. Its neck swayed dramatically as it inspected each trunk it passed. The treekeeper brought its snout right up to the bark, sniffing it thoroughly, marking it with its slobber. Suddenly, it lurched, and feet tensed as she rocketed through the air. The treekeeper had taken a liking to this mature sequoia and stuck its head deep into the foliage. Amongst the leaves, the creature nestled its head within the branches for another meal. Fee pulled herself up to kneel on its scalp. The treekeeper paid her no mind. Its deep brown eyes focused on clearing a path through the brush. Twittering birds alighted all around them, hoping their guardian had found its resting place so that they could construct their nests for the night. Fee got to her feet, perching nimbly, and waited patiently as she was slowly elevated. She took a deep breath, the air noticeably thinner, as the creature broke through the last leaves blocking out the sky. She emerged within a dark sea of green, shielding her eyes against the crescent moon's pale blaze. The twinkling stars hummed softly, discordant against the chattering birds below. The lush leaves rippled in the breeze, tempting Fee to dip her toes in for a swim. The wind blew at her back, and she turned east to face it. The fresh air carried the salty spray of the shimmering sea. Although she could not see it, she knew it was right there. Her ears caught the distant waves crashing against the shore. One last step, she thought. Alone, Peter continued, wary of the footsteps raining down around him. The treekeeper's unyielding march was thunderous, but measured. He surpassed the first two easily and found himself in the thick of the herd. Adrenaline put a spring in his step as he avoided the fatal but long-winded stomps. A scurry of squirrels came plunging in from the forest. Cheeks engorged, they scrambled in circles, darting around Peter. Their bushy tails trailed behind them as they scampered up the leg of a treekeeper and one by one deposited a mouthful of yellow berries into a fold of its skin. Peter smiled at their ingenuity, only to find a group of flying chipmunks working on cramming chestnuts into the treekeeper ahead. I guess I'm not the only one who needs protecting. Peter soon found himself amidst a marching zoo. Gophers and groundhogs crisscrossed between stamping feet. An opal elk and its calf took their place at a break in the line. The father prodded its son with its snout, taking care to avoid touching the calf with its rainbow horns. Birds twittered on their leathery perches. A slurry of songs showered down from the backs overhead. A small fawn was having trouble navigating the craggy earth. It stumbled and shook, falling behind the rest of its herd. Peter pitied the newborn. With its acidic hooves not fully developed, it had no hope of keeping pace with the rest. But wait, he noticed. They're all walking funny. The mud deer, able to melt the very soil it stood on, was characterized by its perpetually stable footing. Yet not a single one in the herd stood steady. Their spindly legs shuddered and quaked as they outstripped the fawn merely on account of their longer strides. They're just plain deer, Peter marveled. They still exist. I can't believe it. The small fawn got fed up with the uneven terrain. It hesitantly headed toward the forest brush, testing its footing with each step. Once firmly planted in the soft grass, its spirit seemed to swell. It happily cantered forward, calling out to its herd to wait up. With a smile, Peter followed. He had found something rare, after all. The snap came without warning. Like a coil for a mouse, two moose-sized petals sprang up from the ground. With a sickening squelch, the fawn was trapped between them. Peter stared dumbfounded. One moment, it was happily trotting along. The next, it was caught, its legs beating against the stiff leaves. A wide-mouthed pitcher plant rose from the soil, its lips wrapping around the fawn, petals and all. A rod in yellow color, its bright red mouth clawed its way up the petals. Inch by inch, the pitcher slowly rose to encase the deer. The poor creature let out a feeble snort. It raked its legs against the plant, trying to clamber out, but the slick inner walls forced it deeper within the pitcher's depths. Its mother came charging back. Seeing its frail leg sticking out at an odd angle, she let out a low cry. The doe paced back and forth within the treekeeper's boundary. A final whimper, echoing out of the pitcher, steeled her resolve. She bounded forward, ramming the plant at its center. The sallow skin depressed at her touch. Through the plant's thin membrane, she could feel the warmth of her son. Snap! A new set of petals sprung forth. This deer did not fight back. Unlike her son, she seemed resigned to her fate. Her soft mule was the only thing with ambitions of escape. Peter couldn't take it. He charged forward, bubble forming in his palm. The fawn was lost, there was no doubt, but he could definitely save the mother. The pitcher had doubled over, meaning to devour the doe from above. It was halfway down when he hurled the bubble in its direction. It smashed into the plant with a shock, sending a wave running through its skin. The pitcher continued its feast, unperturbed. Again, Peter sent a bubble. Again, the plant was unfazed. It slinked further down the petals. He concentrated on his next shot, holding the bubble longer, letting the pressure build, and hurled it with all his might. The bubble connected with the pitcher's base, now upside down in the air, and rolled to the ground, refusing to pop. Peter groaned in despair. The pitcher plant was now a bloated husk, struggling to consume its second full deer. He dropped his hands, defeated, but it was a mistake to believe the plant was satiated. A vine shot out and wrapped around his leg. It came from deep within the pitcher's maw. Peter was yanked to the earth and dragged towards the feasting grounds faster than he could prepare. Shit! His mind was racing. What the hell am I supposed to do? The pitcher was closing in. Too swollen to budge, it waited patiently for its meal to arrive. Peter could see the prickly teeth embedded in every surface down the length of its throat. In desperation, he formed a hard bubble as big as time allowed. The maw approaching fast, he sat up straight and wedged it in the pitcher's mouth. His boots collided with his creation, but the bubble held fast. For an instant, he stopped. Enough for a quick breath. But the pitcher plant only widened, distending its jaw so as to fit Peter, bubble and all. He felt the needle teeth scrape at his ankle and let out a scream. Fee leapt on top of him and unleashed a terrifying roar. Her hands grabbed his thighs, guarding him on all fours, as the fierce bellow erupted from deep within her chest. Her face was within the plant itself. The roar finished, but still the sound remained, echoing through the pitcher and past the sequoias beyond. The ferocious glint in Fee's eyes was matched only by the snarl she emitted from behind her bared teeth. Peter couldn't breathe. The aura emanating from his friend was wholly unfamiliar. He had never seen Fee so frightening. The pitcher plant thought so as well. A silent moment passed as they remained locked in place, before the vine unraveled around Peter's leg and slowly recoiled. The pitcher fell back onto the earth and slunk away to digest its spoils. Too much for you to keep to the keepers? Fee panted. Her eyes pierced his soul, focused black pupils rimmed in blazing sapphires. I tried to save the deer, Peter said between breaths. He was still winded. As Fee got off of him, he sat up to see the pitcher plant resting against the trunk of a sequoia. Although it was just a bulbous mess, he saw through to the two deer lying together for the last time. Mother and child reunited. I must have jumped, 20 feet, I reckon? Fee was staring up at the treekeeper passing by. You're lucky you didn't break a leg, Peter commented. You're lucky you didn't lose one, she countered. Come on, we've still got a bit to go. Fee continued on with the herd. Not a single other animal was concerned with the deer's disturbance. Not one broke pace or stopped to stare. They simply continued on. It was just another common occurrence in the backtrack woods. Fee, Peter called, following his companion. The little girl turned around. Her eyes had returned to their soft blue hue. Thank you. The tepid fire crackled in the crisp night air. Peter blew into his hands before stretching out to consume the meager warmth. They had taken refuge high up in the branches of a sequoia tree. The fanghawk's nest was quite spacious, even with the amber eggshells strewn about. He lay out on a bed of moss, feathers, and what he figured were strips of moose pelt, trying not to dwell on the night's events. But the outline of the fawn, suffocating against the pitcher sack, was etched into his mind. He conjured a bubble to distract himself. As he drew breath, the bubble followed. Inhale, and the bubble swelled to consume his hand. Exhale, and it retracted to a tiny dome atop his palm. He let it expand to fit comfortably within his fingers and lobbed it up. It climbed into the air before floating lazily back down into his awaiting hand. Too light. What else could I have done? He let air flow into the bubble without increasing its size and threw it up once again. I could have tried to burst it, like with the bulrush. The bubble dropped like a stone. Too heavy. I could have put a shield around the mother, blocking it from approaching. He let some air out and threw it again. I should have seen that stupid vine. The bubble arced smoothly and came back down. He threw it again. I should have at least saved the mother. It fell back down. At least the mother. He threw it again. The mother. With a rustling of leaves, Fee dropped down from the branches above. Her arms were full of plump orange fruits. Dinner's here, she announced, letting the oranges fall to the floor and roll about the nest. She grabbed the one closest to her and took a deep bite. Nectar sacs exploded in her mouth as green juices trickled down her chin. She squealed in pleasure, savoring the sweetness. Peter was still preoccupied with his game. This was one of my favorite snacks when I lived in the forest. You're not even going to try one? Fee asked through a mouthful of pulp. You're not still hung up on those deer, are you? Listen, stick to the tree keepers is the first law of the forest. If it can't even follow that, then it was stupid. It deserved to die. Peter crushed the bubble in his hand. It didn't deserve to die. It was going to get left behind. It was trying to catch up. So it tried and failed. Sucks. Fee took another juicy bite. Happens all the time. You can't save everyone, Peter. Hell, you couldn't even save yourself. I suppose. Peter sighed, defeated. No sense in beating yourself up. Here, eat. Fee chucked a fruit at him. You'll feel better on a full stomach. Peter sniffed the strange orange. The citrus tang peppered his nostrils. He took a small nibble, exposing the green flesh within, and immediately spit out the bitter skin. Fee had joined him by the fire, and the two friends stared into the flames as they ate. I've never seen you roar like that, you know. Peter sat peeling his orange and turned to the little girl. Scared the shit out of me. You always want me to stay quiet and wait for an opening. Patience first, and action will follow, Fee recited. As you should. You have those ears, might as well use them to your advantage. He popped a slice into his mouth. The refreshing spray of juice cascaded over his tongue. Fee shook her head. That doesn't work here. There's no waiting in this forest. It respects power and won't be patient while you find your courage. If you stop to think, you die. Well, if I had charged in right away, there'd be nothing left of me for you to save, Peter quipped. Fee spat a few seeds onto the floor. You worry too much. You worry too little, he shot back. That's why I keep you around, she winked. Well, I'm not much use if I can't even fight a frickin' plant, Peter sighed. After this is done, I need to get back to training. After what is done? Fee snapped. You promised to help me until we find... I know, Peter nodded. I know. I just meant I need to focus on developing my power. There's still more I can do. You can't break your promise. The little girl stared him down. I would never do that, Peter reassured her. Not to you. Good. Fee was satisfied. She had one friend left in this world, and her stomach squirmed when she felt her trust in him waver. Then develop away. How's your search going, by the way? My search? Peter asked. Yeah, your whole quest thing or whatever. Peter grabbed another orange off the ground. Why the interest all of a sudden? We decided we're doing you first. Oh, don't worry. We are. I was just curious since that girl Ellie brought it up. And Jack was asking about it too. Jack was asking? Peter coughed. Yeah, he was, Fee responded casually. I told him you'd gotten nowhere. Thanks, he sighed. And I didn't want to bring it up when we met, she went on. But I've always wondered how you expect to find a god you don't believe in. Peter spat a seed into his hand and tossed it into the flames. He watched as the shell quickly browned, then blackened, withering away into ash. He was taken back to the sanctuary of God and the closing blessing they recited at the end of adoration. To the ashes, life will fade. From the ashes, life will blossom anew, but only at his touch. Whether I believe in God or not, it makes no difference, Peter said, eyes fixed on the radiating coals. My disbelief won't cause his existence to waver, any more than a sudden swing of faith will make him come to life. But surely it helps, Fee frowned. If I were a god, I wouldn't want to show myself to someone who doesn't even believe in me. Maybe you're right, Peter conceded, but I can't force myself to change based on nothing. I could pretend, I guess, but God wouldn't be fooled anyway. And if it is useless? If you're right and God doesn't exist? Then I'd have wasted my life. It's not like I have a choice, though. I won't stop looking till I find him. Fee whistled. Geez, somber much? I, for one, am not ready to spend my whole life chasing fairy tales, so he better damn well exist. She smiled. Thank God I'm first, eh? At least who I'm looking for is actually out there somewhere. You don't know if that's still true, Peter thought, but he kept that sentiment to himself. Anyway, Fee yawned. I'm off to bed. We're up with the sun, and we didn't all get to take a nap in the carriage. You could have slept too, Peter said. Instead, you elected to entertain Jack with my life story and physically assault the princess. She waved away his words and snuggled up against the brim of the nest. Within minutes, her exhaustion overwhelmed her, and she was fast asleep. Fee had assured him that there was no danger this high above the forest floor, and that the fanghawk had long since abandoned its home. But still, her calmness was unsettling. Peter threw his last peel on the blaze and shoved the orange into his mouth. With 2 hands, he encircled the small pit in a bubble and slowly squeezed the air out of the fire. As the bubble shrank, so too did the flames. The coals darkened gradually, the heat dissipating with no oxygen remaining to feed on. Satisfied, he lay back down and let the bubble do its work. This time, the deer were relegated to the back of his mind, as all thought was focused on the journey with Fee ahead. They had first met by sheer chance. She was a timid, untrusting, stubborn little girl who was in way over her head. He smiled as he remembered how she had refused to sleep in his presence. She would run off and hide in a tree somewhere, returning the next morning, or else stay up through the night with claims of standing guard. He had laughed in her face each time. Now she slept peacefully on her side. Her small chest rose and fell as her ears were folded comfortably between her head and her arm. Amazing what a simple promise could accomplish. Hey God, Peter's mind spoke out to the heavens. I know you're not listening, but do me a favor and help Fee out anyway. I'm trying, but I really don't know how to go about it. We're just aimlessly wandering around, hoping for success. It's the same plan I have to find you, and look how well that's gone so far. I can't let her down. I'm all she has. Hell, she might be all I have too, I think. I don't know when, but I sort of pinned all my hopes on her. I haven't given up on finding you, but I'd rather focus on a more attainable goal. Peter's thoughts trailed off, and before he could finish his silent prayer, he too had fallen asleep. Fee rushed up the slope in wide strides, back and forth, to keep her footing. Peter stumbled behind. His yawn lasted a full 5 seconds before he could wipe the grogginess away from his eyes. He crankily stomped after her, his boots sliding with each step. Fee hadn't felt the need to tell him that today's march would be entirely uphill. Come on, come on! It's just over this ridge! Come on! she cried, hopping up and down. I'm coming, Peter groaned, and kicked his way through the fallen leaves. Fee burst ahead, all thoughts on the horizon. They had come to the end of the forest, so she figured it was okay to leave Peter on his own. Practically flying up the slope, she leapt from spot to spot in 6-foot bounds, until she reached its apex. Finally at level ground, she took one last look at Peter struggling below, and ran on. She broke through the tree line, the last sequoia waving goodbye in the breeze. Fee found herself at the top of a familiar cliff face, staring out at the shimmering sea. The water stretched out as far as she could see, meeting the rising sun at the horizon. The morning tide picked up the sea's shiny sand and sent glimmering waves bashing against the craggy rocks below. Looking down, Fee could see the slick stones weathered by the winds. Lower still, she saw the sequoia roots breaking through the rock and dirt, twisting aimlessly in the open air. And far below that, she saw the seaside village. Wooden docks crisscrossed into the open sea, the white sand beach as pristine as the day she left. Peter emerged from the forest, panting. Fee ran over to drag him towards the edge. She was babbling non-stop, excitedly pointing, only stopping to laugh at his odd expression. A seagull cawed in irritation as it was battered about by the wind, and Fee was struck by a wave of nostalgia. She had returned to her home. Thanks for listening. A new chapter will be made available for free each week until the 10-chapter volume is finished. Or, if you're excited to read more, you can purchase the complete audiobook over at Audible right now, or the full ebook from Amazon, Kobo, and more. You could also support me via a direct donation at paypal.me/peterandfee, or most importantly, by subscribing to my Patreon over at patreon.com/peterandfee. My patrons will receive both the full ebook and audiobook on day one of their release, as well as exclusive behind-the-scenes insight episodes I create for each chapter. Furthermore, they will get first access to all my content and many other perks exclusive to them. I produce Peter and Fee entirely independently, so I would really appreciate your support in whichever way you prefer. If not, no worries. Please continue to enjoy the adventures, and hopefully, I'll be able to keep creating them for you. Next time, the final chapter. Chapter 10, To Mend a Promise. Available Thursday, February 28th, 2019.